Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Airway Sim. Today, I bring you guys Tungsten Air. This time, we're based in Birmingham City in the United Kingdom. Um, we're simply here to fly as a cargo airline, and we'll eventually add a little bit of passengers to fill some passenger demand, but that's not the priority. The priority here is going to be to become the world's #1 cargo airline, and I'll explain why I picked Birmingham City for this in a second. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, last episode, I decided to quit my Tokyo Haneda or Tokyo Narita anime air save. And basically, the kind of reason for that is because I was kind of getting bored of the game due to slow aircraft deliveries and poor choices in fleet types. Um, as you know in this game, if you're taking it seriously, in general, you want to stick to three different unique fleet groups. So 737, A320, 757. That would be an example of three different fleet groups. Now, the reason you want to go three fleet groups is because this game arbitrarily puts very high expenses if you go anything above three fleet groups to stop a single player from flying every single aircraft type from regional jets to very large freighters and simply dominating the air market. Um, it's a fair restriction and it presents some interesting challenges, although not very realistic. But one of the problems there is because I want 747, which is a vastly inefficient type of aircraft. Um, Four engines, so relatively high maintenance costs, um, abysmal fuel economy. Let's take a look at this. Um, if we take a look at the 747 here, we have 8,600 kilograms of fuel for the best model to fly 4,750 nautical miles with 112,000 kilograms of payload. If we compare that to something like a 777 freighter, which I do not believe is released in this world yet, but it's going to be coming out in a couple years. Yes, deliveries starting in 2008. I mean, the deliveries are just give or take a year or two from real life in this game. I believe this is a year or two later than it came in real life, which is unfortunate since it's my plan. But take a look at this. Compare this to the 777 freighter. Range, even greater. The payload versus range, even greater as well. The fuel economy, 25% better. The payload, just 10% worse. In addition, you have less expensive maintenance, a slightly higher upfront purchase cost actually, because the 777 is a much more popular type of aircraft. Um, yeah, if we can find the upfront cost anywhere, where does this say? I don't think we have to negotiate to buy or lease to view the cost, but maybe the cost isn't available yet uh, because the aircraft's not out yet, so we can go ahead and say negotiate to buy and lease, and let's just see how much it would cost to buy one of these. Keep in mind the 747 was 190 million, so yeah, it's a little bit more expensive to buy up front, but the pure operational efficiency benefits from choosing the 777 it just destroys the 747, and that kind of means you really need to switch into the 767, which is no good, or 777, because and then here's what happens. Um, you can't take more deliveries of 747s because if you do, you'll be using the airplane forever, and you have to switch into 777s. With these two things in mind, that means you have to order only 777. So two of your fleet types is only taking one delivery slot from the new aircraft orders, and not only this, um, like the 777 is notoriously slow to deliver. So that's two of your aircraft fleet types. So you have one fleet type available. Maybe, in fact, definitely you have to fly a 757 as a freighter because it's the only medium-sized freighter available which can cross oceans. Um, that's an incredibly strong aspect to cargo operations. Um, if you think about it, this game, unlike real life, it is based off of a strictly point-to-point model. This kind of highly incentivizes the use of smaller freighter types whenever possible, or the most efficient freighter types available, aka the 757. So you either go for efficiency or you go for size at efficiency. Or you go for the smallest size available, which is, of course, the 757. Those are kind of the reasons why the 757 is so strong, and I'll go more into this in depth later. But right now, I'm just looking for a new 767 freighter. But unfortunately, it's a bit too expensive for me, so I can't afford it. Um, so instead, on to what I wanted to talk about next, which is why I chose Birmingham City um, as the base for the largest cargo operator in the world. Sounds a little bit funny, doesn't it? Well, if we take a look at this very clustered map here, um, this is a representation of where cargo is flying to and from. What does this mean? If you see these red squares in the background of these like concentric circles here, um, these are the squares of area which Birmingham City's airport can reach in a sense. So this is the area of cargo. Um, so cargo produced in this area can fly from Birmingham City Airport to other areas of the world. Um, Now, due to Birmingham City's unique location, it sits just in the middle of the Manchester and London City, what's it called, catchment area. So it catches most of the population from London and Manchester, which makes it one of the biggest cargo hubs in the world because it basically captures 80% of the UK's population. Um, Not quite. It's 41 million. But keep in mind, this airport has not reached its maximum infrastructure level yet. As the infrastructure level climbs to maybe 6 and 7, as I start to get high slot utilization, what's going to happen is the radius will expand and will probably potentially add this square and this square. I'm not sure, but if we can manage to add this square, we will capture almost all of London's population, which is going to be excellent. Because as you can see, we're missing some now. We're missing 3 or 4 million out of this bottom corner of London. I don't think we'll ever manage to touch this upper edge and add a fourth row of squares. But another weird thing is, if you've noticed the squares, I don't are these squares perfectly square? Are they meant to be perfectly square? I have no idea. Um, it doesn't look like it, or the compensation for the fact the Earth is curved does not seem to be working correctly. Um, this is something I've just noticed now. Here's what I mean by that. If you're near the equator, um, what's it called? A square kilometer, like in terms of aspect ratio, is going to be a square. As you go north, um, I feel like a square should get wider because the circumference of the Earth at this location is no longer the same. Um, so the circumference of the Earth, everyone can agree, is maximum. If you draw a line of latitude around the equator, you're going to get about 40,000 kilometers. If you draw a line of latitude at like 50 degrees north, like where London is, it's not even going to be close. Um, it's not even going to be close to that amount of square kilometers. But as you can see, the catchment area seems to be like a 5 by 3 kind of square like area, and I'm not sure why that is. It should be a 3 by 3, right? Going by conventional logic, unless the squares are just not meant to be squares. Uh, I'm gonna ask on the forum about this later, and maybe in the future episode, if I ever get a response, I'll make a follow up on what I think about this. But yes, I'm rambling now. I was rambling along on and on about why Birmingham Airport has a great catchment area. Now, with this in mind, what kind of routes are we going to be making? Now, let's take a look at Route Planning tab, because this is actually quite tough. If we take a look at Birmingham City to North America and the United States, which is once again the biggest cargo hub in the entire world, if you're flying cargo and it does not import to the United States, um, chances are your cargo hub is not a very good cargo hub. Now, let's take a look at a few routes I've made. Savannah, what's another couple ones? Huntsville, where else? Yeah, these are a couple of the routes I made. I think I made a couple routes on the second page too. Yes, we'll go ahead and open these routes up. Now, why do I want to look at them? Um, when I first made these routes looked very similar to, probably, let's say this, Indianapolis. Um, these routes look like this. An enormous amount of potential demand and a tiny amount of current demand. Well, in this case, if we take a look at the airport information for Indianapolis, um, we can see there's a few other airports around here, but we don't have to worry about these ones too much. Like besides Cincinnati, but the overlapping area is very small, so it's not a big concern. So basically, consider Indianapolis as an isolated airport. Now, if we go ahead and remove this X up here, um, then it gives you the real route airport information map. I don't know why it doesn't do that by default, so you have to go ahead and remove that X. But let's take a look at the flights. So we got one from Tokyo and Osaka, so players there aren't slacking. One from Istanbul, so another player who is in Istanbul is not a slacker. But we can see we're missing major other cargo hubs like Paris, Schiphol, every other German airport, which isn't Frankfurt. Um, and even areas like Spain or Beijing could have enough cargo to fly here, but I'm guessing those players are a little bit slacking too. Um, Anyways, we can see that the UK players are actually doing quite well. They're flying these routes, and there's 3 individual routes to London. Now, it's a lot of work, like, and I mean a lot of work, to go ahead and open all these tabs and then check how much demand is being flown. And we have to reverse the direction because keep in mind the US is mostly import. So we can see the Manchester demand is completely saturated. There's no demand left. But if we take a look at the United Kingdom, well, okay, out of London Luton, the demand is basically flat. Um, so yeah, like not too much oversupply, but a little bit. And if we take a look at Gatwick and reverse the direction again, we can see that there's just a little bit of oversupply. So how do we really know if we can pull demand? Well, in general, take a look at Indianapolis. For 80,000 kilograms of supply, they got 60,000 kilograms of demand. That means if I add a flight, I'll get a similar but slightly lower ratio as I'm starting to saturate the potential demand bar. Now, keep in mind, I can move demand for Manchester too. So for every 100,000 kilograms of cargo I supply to Manchester's, I'll get 50,000 kilograms back. Now, given that I'm in both hubs, this becomes very complicated. So I have no idea how much demand I'm actually going to pull, even after doing my research and opening all those routes to take a look at demand. I still have no idea how much demand I'm going to get. I'm going to be honest here. Um, I have an idea that I'm going to pull somewhere around 75% of the demand I supply. But it's really, really hard to say because we got to remember Birmingham has some of its quote unquote own demand too, where like airport, like cargo in this square would really rather fly to Birmingham rather than anywhere else. I have some areas, squares, where maybe neither Manchester or London are really reaching very well. I have no idea. It's a bit too complicated to understand once the map starts to look like this, which is just an utter cluster. Um, so what can you do instead? Instead, simply open the route with a smaller aircraft. The risk is not very high when the potential is so high. When the potential demand is as high as it is here, like what is this, 250,000 um, on some of the better cities, I think it's near half a million. Rayleigh, yeah, half a million potential. Open the route and find out. Um, in this example in Rayleigh, for every, what's it called? Keep in mind, I'm still missing 2 days of flight. So once these flights are kind of patched in and I add flight, the demand will pull even a little bit higher because it takes kind of the average of a week from my understanding and experience so far. That could not be an accurate statement, but I believe it is. So I imagine for every 80,000 kilograms of cargo I supply, I'd roughly get um, around 60,000 back, so 75% return. That's not bad. That would be a very profitable 777. So in the future, I'm going to add a 777. The reason why I want a 777 is no stop. 767s and A330s both require stops to fly with a full payload over the Atlantic Ocean. If you guys are unaware, the jet stream in the North Atlantic, or like from London to New York, is the strongest in the world. Strongest jet stream. Let's see if I can find this for you guys. Like, yeah, if we take a look at the jet stream, it's what some of the strongest from here, from London to New York, as you can see here on this red line. And not only that, it's blowing against you on the way which you need a higher payload, which is really inconvenient. When you're flying from London back to New York, that's the direction in which the wind is blowing against you, and the payload is just horrible. Only a 777 can fly with a full payload like that, and maybe a 747 extended range freighter. But those are so inefficient that I will consider using them, but not seriously. One thing to note is that the 3 fleet type rule really scales up with the amount of aircraft you're flying. If you're flying just 25 aircraft and you're flying 25 different types of aircraft, the effect actually won't be big, which is kind of counterintuitive to real life. Um, but if you're flying 1,800 aircraft and add a single fourth fleet aircraft, your profits are going to plummet. And here's a case in point. This is my airline. It's not actually like, this is my big airline, Tungsten Edge Air. This profit looks good, but it's actually not. Let's take a look at my monthly view. So for roughly about a month as an experiment, I've been flying with 4 fleet types. It was somewhere in the middle of this month I made the change, as you can see. Ever since then, I have a 7% to 10% profit margin, and before that I had a 30% profit margin. Keep in mind, this is from adding a single A320 aircraft to my fleet. Um, Now, I actually have a lot more A320s, they're just not flying, only a few are flying, and this is just to try out the kind of bad fleet types experiment. I'm going to keep adding them and see the effect as I add more and more and more. I have 541 billion, which is basically playing on creative mode. I cannot be killed. Um, I cannot lose all my money before the world ends. It's simply not possible. So yeah, that's basically a creative world which I can use to test whatever I want with a massively profitable base airline, which I can revert to profitability whenever I would like. Um, but that lets me test for my other worlds, like the modern times. What my plan is here is, first of all, we're about 8 years late into this game. That's a thing, but it's not a big deal. Um, Modern times will run to 2030, which means you have 24 good years left, which realistically means we have about 20 years to expand our airline. I always like this because I like to always be racing towards the top, and there's some decent competitors here. Ciron Airlines, hopefully he doesn't get bored, um, but American based and quite profitable, only 10% profit margin, but keep in mind the fuel right now is quite high, 650 USD. Okay, that's not as high as I thought. But in the last quarter, like a partial part of it was flying the 700 fuel range. And for mostly new airlines with leased aircraft, and keep in mind, it's only 8 years old, this world, he's still doing quite well. The demand in this modern times for passengers, at least, is kind of pathetic, um, which is another reason why I really wanted to um, go into cargo. Let me give you an example. Let's go to route planning. Keep in mind, London to New York is one of the biggest routes in the world. Everybody knows this. Um, in a typical world, by year 2000, this route will have roughly 8 to 9,000 demand per day, at least. Some of them have more. This world, 5,000. I don't know if it's because this is a fresh world and it's going to keep increasing at an abnormally high rate. Dallas, this usually has 4,000 demand, 1.5k. Atlanta, I mean, just the passenger demand is exceptionally low. I really don't like it when they do this because passengers are already the more underpowered method of playing the game. And instead we have these jacked cargo numbers. I don't even know if this is above average. This is just an average game for cargo. I've seen jacked cargo numbers, and then it's mind blowing. But if we take a look at the cargo numbers, they're pretty good. When you have more than enough cargo demand to fly very large aircraft profitably or easily, that's always a good sign. Like this, we have 747 freighters, MD-11 freighters flying like to Norfolk. Oof. I can't wait to bite into this demand with 777s, which is the most efficient way to fly freight. So if you ever want to be an ankle biter with cargo, you always have to pick an aircraft which is larger and more efficient, and then fly from a secondary airport. These are like the 3 key steps into ankle biting when it comes to cargo aircraft. Now, why is it important to fly a larger aircraft? Well, cargo demand splits based off of the amount of cargo you supply, not based off of the amount of cargo um, flights you have, like passengers. Passenger demand splits flight by flight. If you have 10 flights flying on 1,000 demand, every player will get 100 demand, assuming they have the same price. Pretty self-explanatory. In cargo, it's the same thing if you are in the same airport, but unlike passenger demand, you can fly cargo from a different airport with the city-based demand model system. As you can see here, this route doesn't exist, but I can open it and pull demand over. But why would I use a 767 with a stop to pull demand when I could pull even more demand with a 777 while spending marginally more money with no stops, so higher scheduling efficiency, um, still good fuel efficiency because the 777 is very fuel efficient in its entire range almost. Um, so yeah, with that in mind, um, as you can see for routes like this where I have positive demand pull, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to get. As you add more and more demand towards the maximum potential, the amount you can pull relative to the amount you supply gets lower and lower and lower based on the amount left. So for the first 20% of the demand, I could pull at a 125% rate. That means the next 25%, 20%, I could probably pull at 100, and then the next 25% probably less than. So I could probably add about 100,000 kilograms to this route at max before, and this is an optimistic estimate, before I cannot pull anymore without um, supplying more than demand I'm pulling. Um, anyways, with that in mind, that's kind of all I wanted to do this episode. Is just show you guys around the start of my airline. Next episode, I guess we'll talk about the efficiency of the 757, even though I'm not using it. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.